Hello and welcome to the Ending Body Burnout Show. We are your hosts, Chris and Philly, co-founders of a multi-award-winning functional medicine practice, serving busy people with energy, mood, and gut issues.
While busyness, addictive doing, people-pleasing, and perfectionism might be the norm, it's not normal, and it's a major contributor to health issues.
Our goal with this show is to give you a holistic root cause approach to healing your body so that you don't have to continue doctor or diet hopping or popping a gazillion supplements hoping something might stick.
So get ready to heal your body, get your spark back, deeply connect with yourself, and step into the life of your dreams.
Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I am excited for you to listen to this podcast today. Chris and I interviewed the wonderful Mel Kettle, who I met in a business program that we're in, her Empire Builder. And she's super lovely. We swapped books with each other. So I had, before interviewing Mel, I was reading her book, Fully Connected, How Great Leaders Prioritise Themselves, Reclaim Their Energy and Find Joy. And I wanted her on the podcast. So she's a mentor in the leadership space. And I just really loved her approach of putting herself or the self first in order to change the way that leaders lead and company cultures do work. This is a really important topic because I know that a lot of clients that we've worked with, there has been trauma in the workplace where they have been burnt out by high expectations, not getting paid enough, and it comes from the leaders. So if you're a leader of a business or if you want to learn a little bit more about how to put yourself first, this is a really great podcast for you to listen to. And also if you're an employee stuck in toxic busyness and you're yearning for a new way of being, then today is going to be a great listen. So the official stuff, Mel Kettle is a food-loving, book-reading beach goer who lives on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. She is a trusted mentor to executives and leaders and a highly sought-after speaker and trainer on leadership, communication, and menopause at work. After surviving the debilitating effects of work-related loneliness, stress, and burnout in her late 20s, Mel believes self-leadership is essential for creating real connection and sustained engagement. This belief forms the foundation of her two main programs, Connected Leaders and Thriving Leaders. Mel has twice been recognised by Leaders Hum as one of the top 200 biggest voices in leadership, one of only 7 Australians on the list. And she is the author of 2 books, the best-selling Fully Connected and The Social Association. And she is the host of the podcast, This Connected Life, which I was also a guest on. So you can, if you love this conversation, you'll probably love hearing me chat with Mel as well. So let's dive into today's episode. Welcome everyone to the podcast today. We're very excited to have the wonderful Mel Kettle here. I am currently reading her book, Fully Connected, which is awesome. So we're going to talk about that and the content inside of it and everything that Mel does around connection, because I really feel like it so aligns with a lot of what we talk about when it comes to ending your body burnout. So Mel, we love to get personal with our guests first. So are you happy to dive into your own body burnout story? I know it started in your 20s and then a bit later on, perimenopause came along.
Yeah, I'm an open book. I'm happy to answer whatever and talk about it as much as you would like me to get into the nitty-gritty details.
Cool. Let's go.
So, body burnout. I didn't even think it was a thing until afterwards. And that was, I think, what shocked me the most. I was in my, as you said, I was in my 20s. I was 29 and I was working as a conference manager for a marketing agency. In Sydney, we had an amazing contract to run all the events for Microsoft around Australia. And it was such a great job, such a great opportunity. We ran 300 events in a year with 6 people and all of us crashed and burned. So it was a contract that was not the person who negotiated the contract had never run an event before, and so she didn't know what was involved. And it it was just it was a really high pressure environment. There were obviously a lot of events. Anyone who's run events knows that it's you've got to do a lot to get it on time, on budget, with the right number of people in the room. And I'd been in the event world for quite a few years before that, so I was fairly experienced, but it was just if I'm honest with myself, I never should have said yes to this job because I was feeling pretty burnt out and exhausted by the time I started it. And while I learned a lot and I met some great friends and great people and had some phenomenal opportunities, it really it was it was a lot. It was a
Mm.
lot. And from just a short time into the job, I was starting to feel, the symptoms that I call feathers. So I was drinking a lot more coffee than normal. I was drinking a lot more alcohol than normal. I wasn't cooking. I was getting a lot of takeaway. I had my local Thai takeaway on speed dial. And so I'd leave my office and I'd ring them and place an order and I'd pick it up 14 minutes later when I drove past on the way home. Um, I was, I had a lot of gut health issues. I was very nauseous all the time. I had a lot of toileting issues. Um, what else? I was crying
Mm.
all the time, and I was never a crier. Emotionally, I was just not myself. I think what exacerbated the problem is for a lot of that year, I lived alone as well. And so there was no one there to say, hey, here's some vegetables, or
Mm.
maybe you should go to bed when you get home from work at 9 o'clock and not do 3 hours more work.
Yeah. So during that time, I feel like a lot of people can resonate with that. Especially there are some companies that do run a very busy sort of toxic culture where it's perform, perform, perform. What do you feel like was the deeper root cause for you that led to your, so obviously there's the work environment, but
Yeah.
to continue
The-
staying in that and even choosing to be in that?
Yeah, so the work environment, I will also say it was the 90s and that was the work culture. Like the organization I worked for, it was kind of a competition who could work the longest hours or who could
Mm.
be in the office for the most hours. But I feel like the root cause for me was a lack of self-awareness. And a lack of confidence. So I didn't realize that I could stand. I mean, I advocated for myself and I stood up for myself and I told my boss what was going on. But his view was just suck it up, it's the way it is,
Mm.
because that was the way it was
Mm.
in the late 90s. And his view was just to take me out for a boozy lunch and pour lots of beers into me and then,
Which would have
pour me
made
into a
things worse.
taxi home. Yeah, exactly. Especially because I drove to work. So, there were many nights I just left the car in the car park.
Yeah.
And and that just added to the issues as well. But I feel like it was just a lack of self-awareness. I wasn't as aware of my body as I am today. And I'm really grateful I had a GP who I went to see, and he said to me, how are you? And I cried for half an hour,
Mm.
like not little tears, but full on sobbing to the point of almost hyperventilating.
Wow.
And he said, yeah, things are going wrong here. And he took my blood pressure and said, I don't know how you're walking around. I've never
Mm.
seen someone with your age with a blood pressure like this.
Mm.
You need to make some major life changes if you want to die, if you don't want to have a stroke before you turn 30.
Mm.
And it was confronting. So I
Mm.
took a good hard long look at what I wanted from life and I wanted to live a long and healthy life. Took a few months to think all these things through,
Mm.
and to make some big decisions, which involved quitting that job, leaving Sydney, moving to Brisbane, ditching the guy that I was dating who was just so bad for me on so many levels as well.
Mm.
And yeah, getting my act together. And I really, to back to your question of what was the root cause, I feel like it was a lack of self-awareness.
Mm.
And because and also part of growing up in an era where women were taught to serve. We were taught to be the good girl and don't make waves and don't back down from a commitment. And I remember speaking to my parents about it, and my dad said to me in the first week I was in this job, I said, I feel like I've said yes to something that's different to what I was sold. And he said, you can resign. There's no shame in resigning after a few days. And then he told me about the time he was a teacher, which I didn't even know. And he lasted 3 days before resigning because
Oh,
he said
wow.
teaching kids is not for me.
Hmm.
Whereas my mother said, you don't renege from a commitment.
Mm,
And I just went, oh, yeah, the good girl doesn't renege from the commitment.
mm. So interesting. So
Yeah.
for you to heal and come out of that burnout, was it leaving that job, the relationship,
Mm.
changing some things in your lifestyle, or did you have to do any kind of deeper healing work, whether it's physical, inner work?
Yeah, I did a lot.
Mm,
So the initial, as soon as I resigned, I felt this massive weight lift off my shoulders. So the conversation with my doctor was probably in October, and then I resigned in January, the first day back after Christmas. In the office, my boss said to me, "How was your break?" And the first words out of my mouth were, I'm quitting. I'm resigning.
Oh
I
wow.
can't do this anymore."
mm,
And he said, "What?" And I said, "What?"
Mm,
He said, "Do you mean it?" And I said, "I didn't know I was going to say it, but I did. So
mm,
yeah, I do."
mm,
And I gave about 8 weeks notice because I really didn't, again, good girl, didn't want to leave them in the lurch. Um, and I had things, and also decided in that week that it was time for me to leave Sydney. I'd never been happy living in Sydney. And it took me about a week to decide to move to Brisbane. So there were things that I wanted to do in Sydney. I had friends coming out from overseas. I was turning 30. Um, and I had a friend who was getting married in Gosford, which is where I grew up, and I wanted to do all of those things. So the day after the wedding, I moved to Brisbane. And I remember crossing over the Queensland border and feeling like I was coming home.
mm.
And been, I'd virtually never even been to Brisbane apart from 2 work trips.
mm,
That's cool. That's awesome.
So I just felt like it was right. But
Yeah.
my first job in Brisbane, I got a job the first day that I was in Brisbane as the marketing manager for the Brisbane Festival, which is a massive performing arts festival. And in 2000, we had the joint challenges of the introduction of the GST on the 1st of July and the Olympics in Sydney. And the first day of the Brisbane Festival was the same day as the closing ceremony for the Sydney Olympics. And so we really had no idea what was going to happen with ticket sales. And so, in theory, there should have been a lot of pressure around that. But the reality is that I went from a boss who was following the corporate line to working for a woman who was one of the most nurturing, beautiful, kind women I've ever met in my life. And she could see that I was broken.
Mm,
And she still hired me and she just looked after me. And I remember at the end of my first week, she came into my office on the Friday and said, "I've noticed that you haven't been logging off until, 6 o'clock in the evening. That's not how we work around here. We
mm.
finish here by 5. I don't want you here after 5. I don't want anyone here after 5 because we all leave by 5 and it's not safe for you to still be here alone."
That's cool.
And I just remember thinking, wow, in my last job, if I
Mm,
left before 7, people would ask me if I was sick.
mm.
wow.
Wow.
I know, right? I know.
It's so cool to have those two very different comparisons, though, and
Mm,
what great evidence that it's like, oh, there are actually other ways to work
yeah,
and that it's
yeah,
safe to have
yeah,
other ways to work. And actually, there's other
yeah,
people who work like this. So perhaps
yeah.
I can unravel some things and do this too. So the work, well, how do you feel like this experience shaped the work you now do with leaders and helping them to prioritize self-awareness and self-care and essentially prevent burnout?
Yeah, I don't want anyone to ever go through what that experience was. And I got into the work I'm doing now. So when I first started consulting 18 years ago, I was doing a lot of marketing communication consulting. So working with organizations to help them develop and deliver marketing and communication strategies. And one of the things that I've started to really notice is that I was working with a lot of women because a lot of women work in that field and they were exhausted and they were getting burnt out and they were showing all of the signs and the symptoms, plus a whole lot more that I was showing in my late 20s. And I just started thinking there's got to be a better way. So I started to, whenever I would develop a marketing strategy or a comm strategy or a business strategy for a client, I would say, let's talk about capacity. What's your capacity to do this work? Who's doing this work? And I was really conscious of not overloading people. And a lot of people would say to me, oh, well, they'll just have to get it done. And I would say, well, do you want them to burn out? Do you want them to get sick? Do you want them to take a long time to recover from things like a cold or a sore throat or, all of the physical symptoms, let alone the mental symptoms that come from being overworked and stressed? And it took a lot to convince some people, but it was through doing that work that I realized that burnout wasn't really talked about very much. And I had the idea for this book before COVID, probably in about 2018. And again, there was a lot of imposter syndrome thinking, who am I to write this book? I to write, I'm not a doctor.
Mm.
And someone said to me, no, but you've got experience and you've got qualifications in public health. And so you know the public health impact of stress and
Mm.
burnout and exhaustion. And public health is about supporting a community, and an organization is a community.
Mm.
So it might not be the big world community, but an organization is a community. And so how can you support them? And so that's why I wrote the book. It's a very long-winded answer.
No, it's awesome because I'm thinking about a few clients that, oh look, there were probably health issues beforehand, but then being in a toxic work situation where it sounds very much like
Yeah.
your first experience, and this is now in 2024, by the way, that there still
Oh,
are
yeah.
companies out there that where you're expected to do more work beyond what we pay you, and then this shame or guilt when you don't.
It's the shame and the guilt. Yeah.
Yeah.
I ran a workshop for a client, a large organization, probably a year and a half ago, based on the book. And it was about how do you go from surviving to thriving, and how do you prioritize yourself, and how do you look after yourself, and what is it that you need to be doing as an organization to ensure that your people are healthy at work and at home. And the feedback to the man who organized me was, I'm really grateful for that. I thought the culture in this organization was that you just work to get the job done, no matter what it takes, no matter what the toll. And the client who engaged me was horrified, because he's like, no, that might be the overarching culture of the organization or in some sectors, but that is not what I want for my team.
Mm.
And so very slowly the culture's changing. And I rang him about 6 months later to say, hey, let's do some more work together. And he said, I'd love to, but as a senior executive, we've decided to they were doing about 8 massive projects over the whole organization. He said, we've decided to take 4 of them off the table. And so we've got to spend the next 6 to 12 months unraveling those projects so that we can focus on what's really important. And I thought, wow, that's unheard of for an
Mm.
organization that has publicly committed to big projects to suddenly go, the needs of our people are more important than these programs.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
I was so impressed.
It's scary to do that too for people, individuals, but also for organizations as well. That's that cultural change, or that change in the face of a culture or a perceived culture, isn't it? Like that.
Yeah.
That leap of faith for our organization to take, to say, we're gonna do things different. This is a big change that we need to make.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. And I feel like probably a lot of people within the organization, and definitely a lot of the people who from outside of the organization looking in, wouldn't understand why they would be doing that.
Mm.
Is there something that you found useful as a some evidence or some stories or data to just make that not so scary for an organization to take that? I'm calling it a leap of faith. Maybe you might not, or someone else might not, but is there something that you can think of that might help somebody an organization in that boat?
I think a lot of it depends on the size of the organization, the size of the project, the commitment to the project, and the impact of removing a project on other things that are happening within the organisation. So this was an organisation with thousands of staff, and so it's a much bigger deal to take some big projects off than if you're, say, a small business and you decide we might not start a podcast this month, we might start it in 6 months because we've got too much going on. So it's, and then a lot of that decision making and how those decisions are received, it all comes down to how much are the decision makers trusted by the other people in the organisation. And if you don't have that organisational trust or the trust of the executive, and the people that need to trust the executive and the board as well as the staff, if that trust isn't there, then it's going to be a much more fraught issue and challenge to unwind and unravel.
Trust. Yeah, that's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
So often these changes start with the leader themselves as well, and then everyone else getting on board with putting themselves first. In your book, you talk about why it's so hard for people to put themselves first, because we do hear it. It's like, just put yourself first. You got to fill your own cup before you can pour to others. We all know it. Yet a lot of people really struggle to do it. Why do you think that's the case?
I think for a lot of people of my generation, Gen X, we're told that putting yourself first is selfish. Self-care is selfish. And the number of times where I would say to people who should love me, family, friends, I can't come to this event because I'm just exhausted and I need time alone. They would just joke about it and go, oh, you need me time again, do you? And they kind of would shame you into attending or shame you into doing something that you don't want to do. I really would love to think that that's changing, but I don't know if it is. And certainly for a lot of people, it's not. So it's that view of I'm selfish to put myself first. And I also think a lot of people are so ingrained in putting other people first and people pleasing that they don't know how to set healthy boundaries to look after themselves. They don't know how to set healthy limits on things. They don't know how to say no with kindness and compassion. They don't know they actually don't know what they want and what their priorities are when it comes to them, because they're so used to being there for other people, whether it's at work or at home.
I think about that too with subconscious patterning as well. So if there's deep beliefs that you're no good, no one loves you, something wrong with you, which then causes those patterns to develop, it's actually really unsafe. It's unsafe to the nervous system to put yourself first initially until it becomes more familiar and you break down those unconscious barriers.
Absolutely. Those feelings of worthiness and self-worth, they're deeply entrenched from when you're a child. And the language that people use for you. I try so hard these days to not, when I see a cute little baby, to not say, oh, isn't she beautiful? Because that attributes worth to physical attraction and beauty. So I instead try to say things like, I don't know, something behavior related.
Which is really hard, isn't it? It's
or
like
just, it's really hard.
We go to their what they look like.
Yeah. Or to focus on the parent and say congratulations and how you're dealing with everything.
Yeah.
But people are so used to you going, oh, that baby's so beautiful and so cute, and aren't you lucky?
Yeah.
When they might not be feeling lucky, they might be feeling like, holy crap, I do. Why have I got this child?
Is your baby a good baby? Does your baby sleep? Is your baby good?
Yeah. I've got a friend who struggled enormously with her first child and probably with her second. And we weren't close friends. And so I was never going to be the person that she would call or reach out to. And it wasn't until years later that I heard how deeply she struggled, and she never told anyone. Because she was so used to society saying mothers are supposed to spring back immediately. You've got to get your post-baby body back in shape, and social media makes people believe that all babies are perfect, that they sleep, that they're healthy, that they don't spit up all over you.
Yeah, it's definitely my story too. Even when talking to the GP at the checkup post having the baby, so much shame, but even lack of understanding that I even had a mental illness at the time. I was like, I'm okay. But
Mm.
also I don't really want to tell the whole truth because people are going to think I'm a bit weird, weak, incapable, can't stick it,
Yeah.
can't handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what happens to your child? Will they let your child stay with you
Yeah.
if you show weakness?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So you are very
Scary.
big, very scary.
Yeah, it's I love using the word dangerous because it's kind of, you don't think, oh,
It is
is it
dangerous.
dangerous? But it's like, yeah, like it's dangerous to your nervous system. Maybe on your conscious level, you might not use that word, but yeah, it's dangerous, risky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. All those things. Yeah.
So how can we start connecting with ourselves then? So your book is all about becoming fully connected and first and foremost with self.
Yeah, I think it's not easy. You have to ask yourself hard questions. And I think one of the hardest questions is, am I happy? Am I doing what I love? What am I doing that I love? Am I with the right people? Do I have the right partner? Am I doing the right work? Am I living the life that I want to live? And if the answer to any of those things is no, and it absolutely will be for at least one of them, if not all of them, from my experience, then start thinking about what is it that you can do to make changes. And to make changes, it comes back to being really clear on what are your values and what are your priorities. And knowing that your priorities, what's a priority for you today will possibly not be a priority for you tomorrow or the next day or the next day. And that's fine. But what's your priority today? And what do you want from life? And what do you want in the long term? And what is it that you need to be doing in the short term to take you one step closer to getting that in the long term?
Mm. I like that. What's your priority today? Because you also talk about like the importance of discovering what lights you up, which might be really different from one day to another. So really practical. What does that look like?
So I start by saying to my clients, what do you love to do? And what is something that you can do only for you every day that gives you joy? And it might be sitting on the front step with a cup of tea before anybody else in the house wakes up for 5 minutes. Or it might be having a bath and putting a sign on the bathroom door saying, unless there's blood, don't come in. Or it might be going for a run. Or it might be, having a conversation with a friend who just makes you smile.
Mm.
It doesn't need to be a big thing or an expensive thing or a time-consuming thing, but just starting with something that you love, that you can look forward to. And so, if you're really in the depths of despair, think about before you go to bed at night, think about what's something I can do tomorrow that will give me joy. And then you can go to bed with something to look forward to for the next day.
Yeah, I love that. I think too, because we've had conversations like this as well, and a theme that I see come up sometimes, and I've also seen this in my own life in the past too, is that sometimes people are doing that. They're like, okay, yep, I'm doing that. I'm ticking it off. Yep, I did that thing, but it never feels like enough. It's almost like, oh, but maybe that walk along the beach, like, is that enough? It's almost like there's this lack of permission or acceptance that it's okay just to be and to feel it.
Yeah.
So to understand what brings you joy and happiness, but to immerse yourself in that and be like really happy with it. Even if it's like, especially when it's the small glimmer of things.
Yeah, really focus on that thing. And it's really simple. Like, I ate a delicious dinner the other night, but I was reading a book at the same time. And so I was really engrossed in the book. And even though my meal was delicious, I couldn't tell you what it was or what it tasted like because I was focused on the book. And so if you've got one good thing, focus on that thing. Like, I really should have just focused on the food because it was fantastic. Or at least for the first 3 mouthfuls.
Yeah.
Then go to the book.
Yeah.
But think about it. What is it that you're focusing on? Like, if you want to go out for a walk and really absorb nature for, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, whatever it might be, how much will you absorb your surroundings if you're listening to a podcast?
Mm.
You probably won't.
Mm. Mind you,
Or
I,
if
I
you're,
love a podcast, and I'm
oh yeah, but that isn't to say that you can't ever listen to podcasts. But
yeah.
if your thing is to really enjoy the nature that's around
Mm.
you, immerse yourself in the nature, even for part of that time.
Mm. And I
And
think,
then
oh,
the other
sorry, keep going.
Sorry, I was just going to say, once you've found your thing that gives you joy and you're getting into that rhythm of doing that, find something else that you can improve that will be a small step to making your life better. So it might be have a good look at, all the other elements of your life. How much sleep are you getting? How much exercise are you getting? How much are you eating the right food for your body? Do you have healthy boundaries? Are there people who are in your life who maybe shouldn't be as much? Are there things that you're doing that are not healthy? Like, do you sit on the couch and randomly scroll through Netflix or to decide what to watch, or randomly pick up your phone and then hours pass and you've done nothing except look at Instagram or TikTok and feel less than because other people have better lives than you do?
Mm.
So be really deliberate with those things. If you're going to sit and watch Netflix, pick what you're going to watch and watch it, commit to it, rather
Mm.
than just randomly scrolling
And it gets
and then falling
easier.
asleep 20 minutes into the show.
Yeah. It gets easier as time too, because from a physiological point of view, you're retraining your brain to look for joy and happiness.
Yep.
I was
Yep.
actually listening to a podcast this morning, and I mentioned the podcast. I interrupted you around the podcast on the beach because podcasts bring me so much joy. Like, it is the
Right.
thing. I actually feel like on our Fiji holiday, I came home in a bit of a flunk, and I don't think it wasn't
A flunk.
a funk,
A
flunk,
funk.
a funk. Yeah, it was
Flunk
partly because I
works for
still
me.
wanted to be there, but I also think it was because I hadn't had the time, and I know that you felt this way too, because it was like there was four of us together all the time, and
Yeah.
both Chris and I really cherish our alone time.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, I haven't listened to a podcast for a long time. And anyway, I just started listening to some podcasts this morning as I got better, as I was getting ready for work. And I'm like so happy. I'm like, my cup
Yeah.
is full. And I could have thought about that in a different way. Actually, it was a millisecond thought that it's like, oh, like, is there something wrong with me that I have to listen to a podcast to be happy? Like, can't I just be happy? And it's like, no, it's actually okay. I'm rewiring my brain and cementing the way that I want to feel and be by I listened to a podcast called Better Than Happy this morning. And it was all
Oh, love that.
around looking for, what was it? Acceptance opinion. So a lot of people can get stuck in opinions like, oh, I don't look very good today, or that person's haircut, it looks terrible, or, whatever it is, as opposed to, well, what if you just accepted opinions as like, oh, that's a good opinion. Oh, that you look good today. Oh,
Mm.
that thing
Mm.
that someone else created or decided to do that's beyond my control. Great choice. And so it was retraining the brain to be happy. And I'm like,
I
yeah,
love that.
this
I
is
love that.
good. This is
Yeah.
good.
And see, you know what makes you happy, and that's podcasts. So
Yeah.
my challenge for your listeners is, do you know what makes you happy? Do you know one thing that makes you really happy? And how do you do that? How do you spend time doing that? Do
Mm.
you spend time doing that? And if you don't, what do you need to change or shift so you can do that thing?
Yeah.
And if you're not sure what makes you happy, then have a think about when you were a child, what did you love? What gave you happiness and joy as a child? What were your hobbies as a kid that you really enjoyed doing? And do you need to pick one of those up again?
Mm. Yeah, I love that. Can we shift gears and talk about boundaries? So this is a big one, especially for perfectionists, people pleasers, overdoers, all the things, the busy patterns. In your opinion, how can we create better boundaries? Where do we start there?
The first thing you need to know is, what are your priorities? And it's really hard to put a boundary in place if you don't know what you want. So think about, um, What is it that you want? Do you want better health? Do you want to be happier? Do you want a better job? Do you want more time for yourself? Do you want more time to listen to podcasts? So what do you need to set limits around so that you can open opportunities to do those things? So when we talk about boundaries, we need to have there's so many areas where we can have boundaries. We can have them around how and when we work and the kind of work we do and who we work with. We can have them around how we spend our time. We can have them around our people, the people in our lives, our colleagues, our family, our friends. And when it comes to people, we can have boundaries around when are they allowed to visit us? When do we accept phone calls? When do we talk to them? How do we let them talk to us? Do we have a boundary that says, if they start to treat me badly or say nasty things to me, at what point do I say that's unacceptable? I'm not going to let you treat me that way. Do we have boundaries around, or how do we put boundaries around? I mentioned time. How do we spend our time? Do you spend your time? What do you do in the evenings? What do you do in the mornings? Are you rushed? Are you always rushed in the mornings to get everybody out of the house to work and to school? Or, and why is that? Is that because you don't have a rhythm or a routine? Or is it because you don't set an alarm, or because you sleep in? Or is it because you don't have a boundary around what time you have to go to bed at night, the night before? Or is it because you don't have habits that, like, there's so many things, but when you have boundaries, and as a people pleaser, it's a lot more difficult to have healthy boundaries because you want to prioritize other people at the expense of prioritizing yourself. So have a think about, what do you say no to and what do you say yes to? And when do you say yes and no to things? And what prompts that response, particularly if you say yes to things that you really don't want to do? How does that work?
Mm.
How does that make you feel?
I think the feeling has been really crucial for me too. So if I get an email or something, a request, and I have a bit of a bit of a dysregulated feeling in my body, I do not reply yet. Because that reply or that response, if I'm in a dysregulated state or a little bit triggered, it will be a fear response basically. And it might not be what the aligned me wants to say in that moment. So when you're more in tune with your body and your emotions, then it helps as a cue to give a response in an appropriate time frame.
Yeah. And that's a whole other series of boundaries with email. How do you respond to them? Do they just pop up on your phone and you look at them and go, oh God, really? That person's emailing me again? Or do you have set times in your day and week where you look at your emails and respond to your emails?
Yeah, I like that.
Easy to say, not very easy to do, particularly when you're in the habit of having your email browser open all the time.
Yeah.
And you're used to having notifications pop up everywhere.
Yeah. Are you looking at me because I have tabs and stuff open?
You're a
Oh, I have tabs as well.
tab queen.
Tab queen.
I think that's something that I've learned to I guess regulate my nervous system a little bit better with ADD. Is if I know that I've got less choices, just close things down, finish it up. Yeah. When I'm done, I'm done. Yeah. I can always find it. And if I can't find it, well, it wasn't very important then. For me, was it? That's my story that I use. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think when it comes to tech, there's a couple of really good questions. There's how many apps do you have on your phone is one question. Another question is, how many of those apps have notifications that pop up on your phone? And how many tabs do you have open? But do you close your computer all the way down at the end of the workday? Or do you just shut the top?
I'm having a little giggle because Chris always says, when was the last time you shut your computer down? You will solve it by turning it on and off.
Mine shuts itself off frequently.
Shirley's like, I've got a problem. I'm like, okay, have you turned it off and on? No. give me a call if that doesn't work. And she's like, it's working. I'm like, did you turn it off and on? Yes.
I hate you.
It's like
Yeah,
the
I've
IT
had a few
crowd.
issues.
They answer the phone. They're
I've had
like,
a few issues.
yeah. Have
I've
you
had
tried turning it off and on?
Oh dear.
I've had issues with my phone, with an app on my phone. We've got a Tesla and it all runs through an app, and the app hasn't been working properly. And I thought, wonder what will happen if I just power my phone all the way off.
Yeah.
But gee, the app works properly now.
Awesome.
Ding. Now, I'd love to end with just touching on perimenopause, because in
Yeah.
your book you went on a fantastic overseas trip all by yourself, but your excitement level wasn't as good as what it could have been. What
Yeah.
was happening around then? And like, was that connected to, had you lost connection with yourself, or out of alignment with
Yeah.
values again, or how did that all
Yeah,
interconnect?
I feel like I had. So that trip was in 2015, I think, and might have been 2014. And I went to Europe and the US for 7 weeks, and it wasn't meant to be that long. And I wasn't meant to go alone. My husband was meant to join me for the last 3 weeks in the US, but for lots of reasons, he ended up not being able to. Um, and I went because I wanted to see my aunt who was living in Paris. And so I had 10 amazing days in Paris. As anyone who's traveled alone for an extended time knows, there's highs and lows of travel, and it can get really lonely when you're on your own and you haven't got anyone to share those incredible experiences with. And, even though I spoke to Sean every day, it just wasn't the same as him being there and sharing that experience with me. There was one particular day when I was in Istanbul where I just pretty much cried the whole day because I realized that I was having this amazing experience, but it was a crappy day. The weather was awful. Um, my brand new umbrella that cost me a fortune blew inside out and was destroyed within about 5 seconds of its first
Wow.
use. And that, I think, was what just tipped me over the edge.
Hmm.
But I went back to the hotel that I was staying in, and I just spent the whole day watching Netflix and reading a book and thinking. And it made me realize that there were elements of my life that I didn't love. And the only person who had control to change any of those was me. I was working with a client at the time who I should have finished up the work, but it was extended. And so I decided that when I got back to Australia, we would end that working relationship. But I think the other thing that was happening is my mum and dad had died a few years earlier, and I really hadn't had enough time to grieve. And so there was a lot of grief that I was dealing with on that holiday as well. And spending time, they love to travel, spending time with my aunt, who was my mum's younger sister, and very close to both her and my father and me. Um, we did things. There was a lot of emotional upheaval, positive and negative, and I just spent a lot of time sitting down and thinking, what do I want? What do I want from life? Am I happy with the work I'm doing? No, I'm not. Am I happy with the people I'm working with? No, I'm really not. Am I happy in my relationship? Yes, but it could be better. Am I spending the right time with the right friends? Probably not. And so I came home and made some fairly drastic decisions. I sacked almost all of my clients, apart from one who I loved, and got rid of him about another year later, and just kind of started my business again. And that gave me a burst of energy that kept me going for a long time. Mm.
So was this all tied up with perimenopausal symptoms, or
I reckon
that
it probably was
yeah.
because I was deep in the throes of perimenopause at the time, and I probably didn't even realize that
Mm,
it was a symptom. But the symptoms of perimenopause for me that were the worst were extreme anxiety and some depression.
mm,
And so I have no doubt that they were two of the causes of my uncertainty and and um rethinking what I wanted. The other thing, with perimenopause, it's a major change of life. And I wonder, like, I don't have children. I never wanted to have children. And so looking back, I wonder whether there was some questioning of that decision and have I made the right decision? Because once you go through menopause, your ability to have a child is you can't have kids anymore because you stop ovulating,
mm,
unless you go through, a surrogate or other options. But that wasn't something I was ready to do. And so I wonder whether some of that was a part of it as well.
mm, mm.
Mm.
And was it, again, changing the way that you were working, returning back
Mm.
to alignment with self, and then you kind of passed through menopause, into menopause, sorry?
Yeah.
Or did you have to get extra support for that?
So I started going through perimenopause when I came off the pill when I was 41 and had 42, might have been 42, gained 10 kilos in 10 weeks, then gained another 10 kilos over the next probably 6 months. Started to get a lot of brain fog, forgetfulness, hot flushes. Spoke to my GP about it, who said, "You're too young, come back when you're 52 in 10 years, and I'll put you on HRT." Well, I was done and dusted with menopause by the time I was 48.
Mm.
So 52 would have not been very helpful. So I just
Crazy.
kind of pushed through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made a lot of diet modifications. I saw a naturopath. She was fantastic. I was having a lot of gut health issues,
Mm.
and working with a naturopath cleared a lot of that up. And not only did working with a naturopath and making some fairly I did a very extreme elimination diet, or it was extreme to me. It probably wasn't in the natural scheme of things. But I eliminated a whole lot of foods. And then when I reintroduced them, I identified what was a problematic food for my body and my brain.
Mm.
And so I can still eat most of those foods now in small amounts, but I can feel myself like I'm starting to get sweats at night again. And I know it's because I'm drinking more caffeine than I probably should, and probably having more alcohol in the evenings on occasion than I should.
Mm.
I wear an Aura ring, so that gives me very irrefutable data about the quality of my sleep. And I can look at it and go, yeah, I had red wine that night. What a surprise. Crappy sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Had a glass of a gin and tonic that night. Probably had 3 gin and tonics that night. What a surprise. I had a crappy sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So, but back to your question of menopause and that trip, I feel, and what I did, that was the biggest thing. So clearing up my diet and kind of resetting got rid of the brain fog. It got rid of the anxiety. It got rid of all the gut health issues that I was having. It got rid of a lot of the hot sweats and the night sweats and the hot flushes, and it really worked for me. So I didn't need to take HRT or any other medication. That isn't to say that I might not need to in the future. I'm still within that window of just being able to if I need to, but I'm pretty good now.
That's so good. Cool.
My bone density is good. All the good things are good.
Yeah.
I've always been really proactive about looking after my health.
Yeah.
Particularly after the "you're going to have a stroke before you turn 30" conversation.
Yeah.
I've always been really
kicking the
conscious.
guts. Yeah.
It was a massive shock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your experiences, your wisdom, your knowledge. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they find you? And you also have a free checklist of signs you need better boundaries. So where can people find that? And I'll make sure I'll pop it in the show notes.
Oh, thanks. So everything is on my website, melkettle.com. If you go melkettle.com/boundaries, I've got a free checklist. And if you're going through menopause, I talk a lot about why we need to talk about menopause at work, which is another conversation for another day. But there's some resources on my website about how you can start conversations about menopause in your workplace, if that's something that you're keen to do.
Awesome.
And that's on the website as well. But yeah, get in touch. I'd love to have a chat.
Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thanks for coming on, Mel.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate the chat.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Philly. Great to be here.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Thank you so much for listening. We so appreciate you. If you'd like to give us extra smiles, drop us a review and spread the love by sharing this episode.
You can also rate your own state of burnout and the root cause contributors by taking our Ending Body Burnout Assessment on our website. And if you're interested in learning about our group or one-on-one Ending Body Burnout programs, shoot us a DM via Instagram or Facebook.
Have the best day ever.